Morris Berman is an acclaimed author, academic, and cultural historian. He has written numerous books, of which I will link to. You can find his commentary on his blog at morrisberman.blogspot.com. It's great to hear from you again, Dr. Berman.
Thanks for the invitation. I think this is the third interview we've done, which is great.
Yes, it is indeed. Once when I visited you in Guanajuato, the other time with my university class, and here we go.
Yeah, I remember that, right.
And today we'll continue our declinist discussion, or post-mortem, of the United States, as you call it, both of us comfortably located on the outskirts of the empire.
Thank God.
So let's start by talking about both of the candidates. You sent me a piece from La Jornada that said both Clinton and Trump were an expression of the same oligarchic or imperialist power system in the United States. Another academic I respect, the Swiss historian Daniele Ganser, said that both are a threat to world peace and that the military-industrial Wall Street complex would continue unabated. How is this election not different from any other?
Well, it is the same in the sense that the regime that America pursues, which is economic and technological expansion and domination of the globe and so on, that will continue. I mean, it falls within the larger framework of a socioeconomic arrangement known as capitalism, and we are the cutting edge of it, and that will certainly continue. There's no question about that. In that sense, it's just more of the same. And really, in my book, Why America Failed, I pointed out that all of this began in the late 16th century. I mean, we've been doing this for 400 years. The possibility of a very different type of candidate, which Bernie Sanders was not. He was not a very different. He was sort of a Franklin Roosevelt type figure, But Franklin Roosevelt is famous for saving capitalism, after all. So it's all the same, and in that sense, it didn't really make any difference who got elected. The major difference I saw was, October 19th was the second presidential debate, and in Mexico City, there's a restaurant that I didn't know about, but apparently is frequented by American expats, called Pinche Gringo. And so they had set up a number of television screens, and they invited about 200 people and the press. I guess Azteca was there, and Reforma. And so people could watch that very boring debate for an hour and a half, and then they told me they wanted me to give a talk on U.S. politics. But when I got there, actually, they had something very different in mind. It was that I was on a panel with two other people. One was, I forget his name. This is really embarrassing. Zoe is his first name. The senator from Chiapas. And another was a professor at a university in Mexico City, ETAM, I think. And so the idea was that the three of us were on a panel, and we would comment on how the debate went. So the talk that I had prepared, was not really one I could give. But the title that I had in mind was, Finally, the Class War is Out in the Open. And to the extent that I could during the various commentary that went on for about the next hour after the debate, I got in as much as I could of the talk I had prepared. But the main point that I wanted to make, which I'd been making for a while now, was that this really was a class war, that Trump, although he's a billionaire, he claimed at least to represent people who had been crushed and destroyed and stepped on by administrations that ran from Bill Clinton through Bush Jr., through Obama, through and now presumably through Hillary. And everybody, I think, the liberals and Democrats really failed to understand the depth of the resentment toward them that had gone on. And here was a candidate who was spouting all the appropriate stuff, Hillary Clinton, but everybody understood that it was just going to be more of the same. It was going to be a continuation of the same neoliberal, globalized regime that had destroyed the lower class and the lower middle class. And so when Trump said things like, you can listen to Hillary, but it's all words, just words, he was right. And when he said, if you want a continuation of the Obama regime, she's your man, vote for her. And so I think that this really was, a very different election, because finally you had all these people that had been kicked around by an economic system that had been in place at least since the fall of the Soviet Union, if not before, were saying, enough of this. We're not tolerating this anymore. And so it was a very, remarkable but significant election, in the sense that it was a rejection of what had gone on for a long time. That would be, there's a lot more to say about the election, but that was what I was trying to say at that meeting at Pinche Gringo on October 19th. That what we really had now was the open declaration of class war. I've also said in the past that with no socialist tradition in the United States, it's very little. It was very unlikely that there was going to be any kind of left-wing revolution, but it was very likely there was going to be a right-wing revolution. And that's what that election represented. Of course, it was through the ballot box, but revolutionary enough. It took everybody by surprise, or most people. And I would have to say that if Mr. Trump doesn't deliver on his promises, especially with regard to jobs, for, economic relief for the people that were destroyed by the people that Hillary Clinton represented, if he doesn't make good on that, the people that voted for him are going to be very, very angry. And they also have guns. They collect arsenals. And that could be a very interesting, I use that word in quotes, development for the United States.
And again, it's nice that we're both situated on the outskirts. But something you mentioned as well, it's a class war, and I recently discovered Peter Turchin's Age of Discord, which confirms what you say, that one of the main problems of this political upheaval is elites overproduction and this severe inequality. I've been listening to Slovenian philosopher Slavoj Žižek's interviews on the election, and him being one of the preeminent leftists, he said he would have voted for Trump, who is a lesser global threat to peace or lesser evil than Hillary Clinton, and that at least Trump would shake the system and status quo. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't vote, so it didn't really matter. And if I did want to vote, I would have to vote, in absentia, but through Washington, D.C., which is where I last lived, and that's not a swing state. It's 95% Democratic, so it didn't matter whether I voted or not. But yes, I was relieved, shocked, but relieved as well, when I woke up in a hotel room in Germany the morning of November 9th to discover that Trump had won. Of course, that shakeup that Zizek refers to could be a very dangerous shakeup. It could be a shakeup that we don't want, and that's certainly a real possibility. But especially if we're going to discuss foreign policy, Hillary would have been a disaster. She's a warmonger, she's a saber rattler, and that's how she would get her prestige from opposing Putin and generally creating problems in the world. And I think that Trump, I don't believe for a minute that he was a puppet of Putin, as Hillary claimed. That was totally dishonest. But I think he'll have a better relationship with the Russians than Hillary would have. And although, he claims he's going to destroy ISIS and so on, I don't see him as somebody who wants problems in the sphere of U.S. foreign politics, whereas Hillary did. And we have to really address that, as Zizek did, that at least, not on the domestic front, but at least on the foreign front, this could be a lot better for the world than a Hillary Clinton presidency.
And Trump said he wouldn't prosecute Hillary. Forecaster Martin Armstrong, who was illegally himself jailed by the government, he made a sober observation that it was probably the correct thing to do. Otherwise, it would have created a chaotic and even more destabilizing national and political situation. Do you think it's a good idea not to prosecute Hillary, or should she be sent to Guantanamo regardless of the political repercussions?
Well, I felt bad about his retreat from there because she's such an awful human being. She and Bill are two of the sleaziest, most self-aggrandizing people that have ever existed on the planet. And her entire goal in being president was simply to be president. She didn't have any vision at all, any more than Obama did, really. And, what an awful human being Hillary is. But, so it would have been great to see her in jail. I would have enjoyed that. But I think that Trump probably did the right thing in the sense that, during his campaign, there was a problem that he had of flying off the handle at trivia. This girl who gained weight, or the Muslim family who had lost their son in Iraq in 2004, and so he would fly off the handle off of stuff that required a bit more maturity and self-control, and he didn't seem to have it. But this displays a kind of generosity that I think is necessary in a president when you say, Hillary has suffered enough. I'm not going to pursue her in any way. We need to move on to things that are larger and more important, because it really would have, although she definitely deserves to be jailed for a very long time, nevertheless, letting bygones be bygones, I think, is the higher road to take. And he's showing some presidential characteristics now that he didn't during the campaign.
And I've recently been catching up on the Netflix show House of Cards these last few months, and it's just uncanny the similarity between that show and what's really going on. And I've been speaking to somebody who is from New York, from where the Clintons are, and they have confirmed to me that they know people who have worked and have been around the Clintons, and that Hillary, she treats the people around her like crap, that she's literally throwing chairs and throwing things at people. And I think there was a report recently about that. So not a
you mean post-election?
Right, post-election, but even before the election, that in general she would just treat people around her like crap. So
it's not a surprise. It was quite an admission that was significant, I thought. I don't think the press picked up on it enough. But in one of the debates, she said, there's a public me and a private me. Mm-hmm. And it was that remark was made in the context of being challenged to release the transcripts of the lectures that she gave to Goldman Sachs. And, I think it's pretty obvious that she's going to tell the folks at Goldman Sachs one thing, and she's going to tell the voters, the public, something very different. And the folks at Goldman Sachs are her pals, her buddies, fellow billionaires like Lloyd Blankfein. And I would trust much more what she said to Goldman Sachs than what she said in public. And and what she said to Goldman Sachs was, "Your money is safe, my money is safe. We're in the saddle, we're running things, and everybody else is a basket of deplorables." This wholesale contempt. She's just a remarkable person in the most negative way imaginable.
Just another point on Trump. You said you believe he would accelerate the internal domestic collapse. What are some of his? What do you think of some of his seemingly promising appointments? He's looked at Representative from Hawaii, Tulsi Gabbard, who is very anti-war, or Michael Flynn, who exposed how the U.S. was assisting ISIS, as well as Trump is against the TTP or TPP. And what do you think is going to happen with him? Is he going to accelerate the collapse, or is there hope, or is this that same false hope that we have every 4 years?
No, I think this is more than the same old every 4 years. This, to me, is very likely the end of the American experiment. It's been running for 400 years now. It's based on hustling. We finally elected the ultimate hustler, the guy whose life has entirely been about money and economic expansion and power. And there's no real place to go from here. I feel that increasingly dissent is going to be very difficult. Trump is already haranguing the media about criticizing him. If the cast of Hamilton can't make a few remarks to the vice president elect without getting this strong reaction from the White House or the future White House, he's not going to tolerate very much dissent. And given the cowardice of the American media, they're going to fall into line. The New York Times and the Washington Post, they're going to fall into line. And I think that the possibility of a real kind of de facto fascism is upon us, and that the democratic experiment is basically over. It wasn't much of an experiment to begin with, in my opinion, because I really feel it was about hustling, at its root. But any pretense to it now, I think, is shattered. And that has, however, some positive aspects in the larger world, which is to say that I think other nations now, with the election of somebody like Trump to the presidency, other nations, and perhaps even our allies, are now starting to think in terms of a post-American era, that the United States is finished. It's really going to walk off the world stage. It's just not going to have the respect or influence that it once had, and that it's being eclipsed. And we are, moving to a different type of world where the United States doesn't have the influence or prestige that it once did. And, considering the genocide that the United States performs on a daily basis and the plutocracy that is running that genocide, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the United States to step off the world stage, I think.
I mean, it is truly amazing to be witnessing what is happening. You've written about it for decades, but now we saw the Philippine President Duterte come out and literally announce the separate military and economic separation from the U.S. and the clear realignment with China. Other Southeast Asian countries have been doing the same. Recently, France, it was reported that France and Iran made a deal where they wouldn't use dollars for their trade. And it's really happening right now. And Anything else you can mention on that post-American world front?
No, except well, just one sort of P.S., and that is that I would really hope, as somebody who's lived in Mexico for more than 10 years and who loves the country, that this is an opportunity for Mexico to develop some very strong nationalism in opposition to the United States. Vicente Fox was never a big hero of mine. I was never a great fan of Mr. Fox. But at the time that Trump said, I'm going to build a wall and I'm going to make Mexico pay for it, Fox responded by saying, I'm not paying for that frigging wall. And that's the type of energy we need in Mexico right now. I think recently, just a few days ago, Jorge Castañeda, who he now teaches at NYU, but I think from 2000 to 2003, he was Mexico's foreign minister. And he did an op-ed piece in the New York Times, and he said Mexico needs to fight back now. And I was really cheered to see a Mexican writing that. And I hope that he will write it in Spanish as well, and Reforma and other papers, that Mexico needs to stop this slavish imitation of the United States as being cool, hip, and avant-garde. It's not. It's a stupid, trashy civilization. It wrecks family, community, meaningful work. Across the board, it's destructive. And it's done a lot of damage in creating a hustler elite in Mexico, which is to me, a very sad thing, and destruction of values and so on. And it's time for Mexico to claim its own nationalism, and to basically, in the same way that all those voters for Trump gave the finger to Hillary and the neoliberal establishment, Mexico needs to give the finger to the United States. We're not paying for that frigging wall. You're not going to put up that wall. You put it up, we'll smash it. We're not going to play ball with you anymore. I would like to see Mexico say that and act on it, and develop a real presence in the world as a separate civilization, independent of American, U.S. influence,
So you're saying there's a chance you won't get to write Dark Ages Mexico?
Yes, I think Mexico has passed through enough dark ages and now needs to reach for a dawn. There will be no dawn in the United States. The United States is finished. But Mexico has the possibility. I mean, the real problem right now, as Castañeda pointed out in this article, is that Peña Nieto has no spine. He's just appeasing Trump so far. He doesn't have the courage, like Vicente Fox did, to say, go to hell. And we need leaders now, Mexican leaders, not just in Los Pinos, but we need Mexican leaders now to stand up and say, ya basta. Enough with the United States. We're somebody else, and we're going to be somebody else. And I'd like to see that happen. I mean, I don't know what the odds are, because I always come back to that quote from Porfirio Diaz when he said that the United States, Mexico is too close to the United States, too far from God and too close to the United States. Well, it is too close to the United States, but it can, that geographical closeness doesn't have to translate into this kind of slavish younger brother, or whatever it is. The United States' backyard, so to speak, as one assistant ambassador. I think it was under Fox actually said, and subsequently got fired because you're not supposed to say that, especially since it's the truth. But now it's time not to be a backyard. Mexico, and I say we have our own yard, and it's a fine yard, and it's a great history, and it goes on for thousands of years, unlike this, 200-year experiment with the United States, which didn't work out very well. It just needs to reclaim all that, I think, and I really hope that happens. And around the world now, as you pointed out, countries are recognizing that maybe we shouldn't be doing business in dollars. Maybe we shouldn't be so excited about the United States. And, I think that eclipse is taking place.
And I see it here. As long, the years that I've been here, this slavish copying of the U.S., I feel like Mexico is suppressing its, and the Mexican people who follow the American dream are suppressing their own potential. And if they would just think outside the box, think for themselves, take the reins, there's just so much opportunity and things that they can do. And I'm being surprised now on that last point you mentioned, that Mexicans now are telling me that they refuse now to go on vacation or shopping to the United States. Like it's
for them.
It's not
Good
even
for them.
It's not even a joke. I mean, they're going to go to Canada, or maybe they'll travel around Mexico, but it's across the board here.
Yeah, well, that's a positive development, and I hope it expands. I mean, it really comes down to a question of values, and I've talked about that a lot with regard to, what are the values of the United States? That's pretty thin. It's pretty thin. There was a book by a Moroccan writer that I like, Tahar Benjeloun, called A Place in the Old Village, and it's about a older Moroccan guy who in his youth went to France because the opportunities for making money were better. And so France did a lot of things in the sense of there's free education and free medical care and types of things you don't find in the United States, but France had made those available. But he lost his entire family. He had 5 kids, and they all drifted. They became French, and they all drifted off into the girls wearing very, scanty outfits and running around with guys that weren't the best types of guys to be running around with. And the sons are into making money, and he realizes that the trade-off hasn't been good, that what he got out of France was material benefits, but what he lost was everything he cared about. And this is the theme, also, we've talked about this before, the theme also of that film McFarland USA with Kevin Costner, where he begins to realize that all the United States ever really offered was the American dream, and the American dream is about money. And when he lives in this 100% Hispanic town, McFarland, in the Central Valley of California, he begins to see how Mexicans and Chicanos live, the importance of family, the importance of community, the importance of trying to find meaningful work, all these types of values. The values of the United States, I mean, if you put aside democracy, which I regard as basically lip service and not real, but the values of the United States are shabby. And the values of countries like Mexico or Morocco that have, all these traditional structures, these are the types of things that go to the deepest parts of the human soul. And the trade-off, I mean, the central character of this Moroccan novel finds out that the trade-off wasn't worth it. And I think a lot of Mexicans, I hope, are realizing that our values, our Mexican values, are much better than U.S. values, much superior.
And talking on a more practical, pragmatic level, talking about a post-Trump America, apart from some of those of us that have left, what do you think needs to happen now for after 4 or 8 years, whatever happens? I must admit, I see eye to eye with the libertarians on a number of issues, but I think Gary Johnson just destroyed the libertarian movement this cycle. Do we focus on independents like Jill Stein, who seem to have gained some momentum, or what do you think Americans could do post-Trump America next cycle?
I don't think there's anything to do. It's right now the game is wide open, and as I said, if Trump doesn't deliver on his promises to his followers, who wanted a very, very different type of country and a very different deal for themselves, and if he doesn't deliver on that, we could be facing something approaching a coup d'etat. We could be facing a real armed revolt from the right. It's just not clear as to what Trump is going to do, whether he's going to deliver on those promises, what the reactions will be, and so on and so forth. But in a sense, the American experiment is over. We've just come to a dead end. And I think democracy, such as it ever existed, is going to fizzle out. And the United States will limp along as a kind of irrelevance. And I think that it will be even more irrelevant eventually in the world than England is. So I don't think there's anything, to quote, decide, really. It's a question of how these social movements are going to play out. And we'll find out. I mean, we'll know within a few years what the lay of the land really is.
And if there's any last point you'd like to mention, as well as tell us perhaps about your books, where people can find more about your work and what else you're working on.
Oh, well, let's see. I was gratified a few days ago. La Jornada did an article which discussed the book I did called Dark Ages America. It was published here in Mexico by Sexto Piso Editorial under the title Edad Oscura Americana. And what they said in the article, I was very complimented. They said that, Berman has been predicting this sort of thing for years now. And that was the second in a trilogy on the American Empire, the decline of the American Empire. And all these books were translated by Sexto Piso and are available. The third in the series, the American title was Why America Failed, and the Mexican title, the Spanish title, is Las Raíces del Fracaso Americano. And for fun, unfortunately it's not translated yet, but I did a novel published in February of this year called The Man Without Qualities, which is a satire on American politics that I think some readers might get a kick out of. And, it's all on Amazon. Just plug into Amazon.com and you'll find it.
Okay, and people can visit morrisberman.blogspot.com to continue reading your rants on there, which are great. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Dr. Berman.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.